Hi again, everybody. I'm Rob Rosenthal with AskTheLawyers.com, and this is another episode of Ask the Lawyer. Today, we're going to ask the lawyer about workers' disability. It seems simple. If your company has workers' comp and you're injured on the job, you get paid. Unfortunately, it's not always that simple. And my guest today is going to clear it up for us. We have attorney Sarah Stottlemyer of the Atlanta firm Stottlemyer Associates. She's recognized by quite a few organizations for her work on behalf of workers' rights, and she's well qualified to answer our questions on this topic. Sarah, thank you for taking some time and joining us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Let's just start with the basics. Explain for those that don't know or maybe think they know, what is the workers' comp system? What is it all about?
So workers' comp is part of the grand bargain, where basically if a worker suffers an injury while they're in the course and scope of their employment with the employer, then they should get medical benefits and a portion of their pre-injury wages while they try and heal and recover to get back to work. Unfortunately, it's not always that simple, but that is the goal of the workers' comp system.
Now, are all employees eligible for workers' comp?
I wish they were. Unfortunately, independent contractors are not eligible for workers' comp. If you work for an employer that only has, at least in Georgia, you have to have 3 or more employees to have to actually be required to have workers' comp. There's a farm labor exception, there's a railroad workers exception, but generally most employers need to have workers' comp.
And how does an employee know if their employer offers workers' comp? How do they know if they're covered?
They can reach out, well, at least in Georgia, you can reach out to the State Board of Workers' Comp, and you go through the system and you give them the employer's name and tax ID number, and they will be able to look it up and see actually if your employer has comp or not.
And so let's say I'm injured on the job. How long do I wait to report it? Do I need to report it right away? What are the rules on that?
You should report an injury. You're required to report an injury within 30 days in Georgia. There are some exceptions to that in the sense of, say you're walking down a flight of stairs at your office and you're walking next to your supervisor and you actually fall down the stairs and suffer a work-related injury, then you would say that they had constructive notice of the injury. But generally 30 days is when you need to report it by.
What if maybe I didn't think I was injured and then turns out I was injured? Does that complicate things more? And maybe 6 months down the road, I've got a back injury that I can trace back to that.
It does complicate things, and we actually see that all the time. We have injured workers who say they're working for a moving company and they injured their back and they go home and they ice it and they're trying to per se walk it off and see if it just resolves on its own. Unfortunately, 6 months down the road, you're going to have a very difficult time getting medical treatment for that unless your supervisor or someone actually witnessed the injury. But if it's, say you go to your own doctor, your primary care physician, and you say, and it's clearly in the medical record saying, I did suffer, pulled my back while working for my employer, but didn't actually tell your employer at the time, that can grant you some leeway. But generally, you've got those 30 days to notify your employer.
You mentioned going to my personal doctor. Do I get to choose what doctor I go to still be eligible for workers' comp, or are there rules about that?
I wish that you did, very much so, again, because unfortunately in Georgia, there's a panel of physicians. Not all states have a panel of physicians, but a panel of physicians is a list of doctors that your employer is supposed to have posted in a prominent place at your workplace. There's different requirements on it. You have to have a few orthopedics, no more than 2 occupational clinics. Generally, people have an eye doctor or a psychiatrist or something. But those are the doctors that you are allowed to choose from if you suffer a work-related injury. Oftentimes, though, there's not a panel of physicians posted at your employer's workplace. And at that point in time, you can select your own doctor provided they accept workers' comp. Workers' comp is governed by what's called a fee schedule. So those doctors receive different rates than even private health insurance or self-pay. So you actually have to find a doctor that takes workers' comp. In our system, there are employer insurer physicians and there are injured worker physicians. Okay. Unfortunately, a lot of the panels are made up of employer insurer physicians. So you really have to get in there and know the doctors to see what your best choice is going to be on the panel of physicians if they have one and you are relegated to only choosing physicians from that.
You mentioned when we first started talking that workers' comp will pay you a portion of your pre-injury wages. Is that predetermined? What portion are we talking about?
So in Georgia, it's called temporary total disability rate. The max rate in Georgia is $575. On July 1st, it will actually be going up to $675, which is a significant increase for my clients, thank God, because we have been, up until this new jump, second in the country of the lowest comp rate next to Mississippi. So when you suffer a work-related injury, your employer will look at the 13 weeks prior to your date of injury to come up with what's called an average weekly wage. You then get 2/3 of that amount, or up to a max of currently $575. Again, it'll be jumping to $675 after July 1st.
Now, I hate to interrupt you. You mean up to $575,000? Is that what you mean?
$575 per week.
Okay.
So it's not a great system. I think generally it's encouraged to get people in and out of the system very quickly and back to work. A lot of my clients are single wage earners in their household. And say if you have 3 children and bills and all of those things, and you go down from, say, $1,500 per week pre-injury and you suffer a work-related injury, the max you can get is $575 per week, period. That's it. Unfortunately, there's not really anything else you can go after to increase those funds.
What if I have personal insurance or short-term disability or long-term disability insurance? Does that affect workers' comp? Do they work together concurrently? How does that?
Yes, you can use your short-term disability. You can also receive salary in lieu of workers' comp. Sometimes really lovely employers will say, I realize that you're out. I realize you're not going to be able to make it with your family and pay all of your bills on $575 per week. And they will continue paying their pre-injury salary. That does not happen 95% of the time. Your short-term disability, actually, they get to offset each other. So say if your short-term disability is $600, a week or something in that regard, then comp is going to say, okay, well, you're receiving $600, so we don't have to pay you anything. So it's not really a companion type policy. It's not like you can actually use one to double dip, per se, is what they say, even though it's not actually double dipping because you've paid into the system. But it's not great.
So if I'm injured at work and I think, well, let me ask you this. When do I need to get an attorney involved? How do I decide if I need to get an attorney involved? Is it best to get one involved right away for workers' comp? Do I need to wait? What's your advice there?
So I would say, as a rule of thumb, the faster the better to get an attorney involved. You're entitled in Georgia law to make a one-time change on the panel of physicians, and you are entitled to select your first doctor off the panel of physicians. This is all under the premise that your employer actually has a panel of physicians posted. We know all the doctors, the attorneys that the workers' comp bar is a very small bar, and we interact with these doctors all the time. So if you're injured and you go to, say, a Concentra or a Caduceus, which both of those are industrial clinics, so if you strain your back and you get sent to one of those,
Sure.
Your employer is probably going to give you a panel of physicians and say, okay, choose your doctor. If you have no idea what those doctors are, who they are, how they lean in their treatment, then you could make a very costly mistake because you could lose your one-time change on the panel or your initial selection. So I would say, as a rule of thumb, get an attorney as fast as possible. Now, we do have a lot of clients that will contact us and say, my employer is paying for all the medical treatment I need. My employer has continued to pay my $575 per week. I'm receiving my benefits. I think I'm getting better. I've had surgery. I'm getting ready to go back to work. I'll say, absolutely don't get an attorney involved yet. Basically, it just comes down to if they start dropping the ball or sending you to different doctors that you're not aware of, or for independent medical evaluations, that is a huge red flag to get an attorney immediately.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground. I know there's a lot more ground we can cover, and we'll do that in the future, but I think you've helped a lot of people today. Sarah, I appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me again.
And that's going to do it for this episode of Ask the Lawyer. My guest has been attorney Sarah Stottlemyer of Stottlemyer Associates in Atlanta, Georgia. please take a sec, click on the button at the bottom of the screen so you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you'll find out when we have future episodes. You don't have to miss any episodes of Ask the Lawyer. If you have any questions about workers' compensation and you want the best information, or you're ready to choose a lawyer that lawyers choose, please visit AskTheLawyers.com. I'm Rob Rosenthal for AskTheLawyers.com.